Welcome back to the channel, where timeless mysteries meet thoughtful storytelling, and today we open the curtain on one of Hollywood's most haunting legends. There are certain names in history that never fade. They echo through time, not only for their achievements but also for the enigma that surrounds their lives. One of those names, perhaps the brightest star Hollywood ever produced, is Marilyn Monroe. She was more than an actress, more than a glamorous face on glossy magazines. She was a symbol of desire, vulnerability, and the timeless paradox of fame. Today, as we open this journey into her story, we begin with who Marilyn Monroe truly was before the scandals, before the tragic ending, and before the endless speculation that has kept her legacy shrouded in mystery. Marilyn Monroe's rise to fame did not happen overnight. Born as Norma Jeane in 1926, she came from a childhood far removed from the dazzling lights of Hollywood. Growing up, she knew instability. Moving between foster homes and orphanages, carrying a sense of longing for love and belonging. This early fragility shaped her persona in ways few could imagine. Later, the world would see the polished star on stage and screen, but deep down, she was still the young girl searching for stability, desperately trying to hold on to something permanent in a life that seemed to shift like sand. The transformation from Norma Jeane to Marilyn Monroe was not just about changing a name, it was about constructing an identity. Hollywood in the 1950s thrived on reinvention. Studios knew how to sculpt ordinary individuals into extraordinary icons, and Marilyn was no exception. Her platinum blonde hair, breathy voice, and magnetic screen presence became the template for glamour. Yet behind every smile, behind every carefully posed photograph, there was a woman wrestling with the heavy burden of being Marilyn. For millions, she was the ultimate star. For herself, she was often trapped by an image she could not escape. Hollywood adored her, and audiences were captivated. Films like Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and Some Like It Hot cemented her status as a comedic genius wrapped in irresistible beauty. But her on-screen roles often mirrored the way society wanted to see her: playful, naive, the object of desire. What the public rarely saw, however, was her intelligence, her hunger for more serious roles, and her determination to prove she was more than just a pretty face. She studied acting, pushed for challenging scripts, and wanted to be respected for her craft. Yet, Hollywood at the time was not kind to women who demanded more. And the battle between who she was and who the industry wanted her to be grew sharper as her fame increased. Marilyn's image was everywhere: billboards, magazines, news headlines. She was the Dream Factory's greatest creation, and at the same time, its most vulnerable victim. Fame came with adoration but also intense scrutiny. The media dissected her relationships, her fashion choices, even her moments of sadness. It seemed the world wanted to consume every part of her life. For Marilyn, this constant spotlight created an invisible cage. She was adored but often misunderstood, celebrated yet isolated. To the public, she embodied glamour. To herself, she carried insecurities that no amount of fame could erase. She often spoke about the loneliness that haunted her despite being surrounded by millions of fans. This paradox: the woman who seemed to have everything, yet still felt incomplete, made her story universally relatable and tragically human. Perhaps this is why decades later, her name still resonates. She was not just a star. She was a reflection of the contradictions we all live with, the gap between what the world sees and what we actually feel. As we dive deeper into her story, it is important to remember that Marilyn Monroe was not just the sum of rumors or conspiracy theories. She was a complex woman living in a time when the world did not quite know how to handle women who wanted to own their power. Her life shines a light on the pressures of fame, the weight of expectations, and the delicate balance between vulnerability and strength. And it is precisely this complexity that makes her so enduringly fascinating. Even in the height of her career, when audiences saw her dazzling on screen, Marilyn wrestled with internal battles. She longed for stability in love, struggled with trust, and searched for deeper meaning in a world that often reduced her to appearances. And yet, she carried herself with a kind of grace that left an unforgettable impression. Her laughter was infectious, her charisma undeniable, and her presence unforgettable. To this day, it feels as if Marilyn Monroe never truly left us. Her image lingers, her story whispers, and her mystery continues to invite us closer. This first step into Marilyn's life reminds us that behind every legend lies a real human being. The child searching for love, the woman navigating fame, the star trying to balance who she was with who the world demanded her to be. Before we get into the darker questions surrounding her death, we must first understand the light she brought into the world. Because to appreciate the mystery, we must know the person. And Marilyn Monroe, more than almost anyone else, was a person whose light and shadow were inseparably intertwined. The story of Marilyn Monroe took a dramatic turn on the night of August 4, 1962. By then, she was already one of the most photographed women in the world. But on that evening, the lights of Hollywood felt strangely distant from her quiet Brentwood home in Los Angeles. The house was a modest Spanish-style bungalow, tucked away behind gates and hedges, her attempt at privacy in a life that rarely allowed it. Yet, what happened within those walls would shock the world and forever tie her name to one of the greatest mysteries in American history. In the days leading up to that night, Marilyn had been described by friends as both vulnerable and reflective. Some said she seemed optimistic, making plans for new film projects. Others noticed a sense of fatigue, as if the pressure of fame and personal struggles were pressing too heavily upon her. This duality, the smiling star planning her next move and the fragile woman retreating into solitude, created an atmosphere of uncertainty around her final hours. No one could predict that the evening would end in tragedy, or that her home would soon become the center of an international storm. It was her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, who first grew concerned. The evening seemed quiet, but by the early hours of August 5th, something felt wrong. Marilyn's bedroom light was still on, and the door was locked. Murray knocked but received no answer. Anxiety quickly escalated. By around 3:00 a.m. she called Marilyn's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, who rushed to the house. Greenson entered the bedroom through a window and made the discovery that would soon make headlines worldwide. Marilyn Monroe, the luminous star adored by millions, was lying lifeless in her bed. She was found face down, a telephone nearby, as if she had tried to make a call. Empty pill bottles were scattered around, suggesting an overdose. The scene was deeply unsettling, not only for what it revealed but for what it seemed to conceal. Was this truly the end of a troubled life through an accidental or intentional act? Or was there something more beneath the surface? That question began circulating almost instantly, even before the coroner's report was made public. Authorities were quickly contacted. The Los Angeles Police Department arrived, followed by photographers and reporters who, within hours, turned Marilyn's home into a site of chaotic curiosity. The official narrative began to form swiftly: it was a tragic overdose, the culmination of her struggles with mental health and reliance on medication. But the details left behind painted a picture that invited doubt. Why was the timeline of phone calls and witness accounts inconsistent? Why did those closest to her give slightly different versions of the evening? These early cracks in the story would later grow into decades of speculation. The news spread like wildfire. By the morning, headlines around the globe announced the death of Marilyn Monroe. For fans, it was as if the sun itself had been extinguished. Hollywood lost its brightest star, and ordinary people lost the woman who seemed to embody both their dreams and their vulnerabilities. Crowds gathered outside her home, leaving flowers, candles, and handwritten notes. The collective grief was overwhelming, but beneath the mourning was a growing unease. The circumstances of her passing felt too abrupt, too unresolved, to be accepted at face value. Neighbors later recalled hearing strange activity that night, voices, movement, even the arrival of unfamiliar cars. Some details faded into rumor, while others were dismissed as unreliable. Yet, these recollections added another layer of uncertainty to what should have been a straightforward case. If this was merely a tragic overdose, why did so many loose ends remain? Why did the timeline stretch and bend under scrutiny? The imagery of Marilyn's final hours became etched in the public imagination: the locked door, the light left burning, the silent telephone at her side. It was a haunting tableau, one that seemed almost cinematic, as if scripted by the very industry that had built her legend. But unlike the films she starred in, there was no director calling cut, no glamorous resolution waiting in the final act. Instead, there was silence, followed by an avalanche of unanswered questions. For her friends and colleagues, the shock was immeasurable. Many struggled to accept the official conclusion. Some insisted she was excited about upcoming projects and could not have intended to end her life. Others quietly admitted that she had been fragile, carrying invisible weights. The conflicting testimonies only deepened the fog around her death. What was certain, however, was that the discovery in that Brentwood bedroom was not just the end of Marilyn Monroe's life. It was the beginning of a mystery that continues to fuel debate, investigation, and fascination to this very day. As we leave the scene of her discovery, we are left with a chilling contrast. The world saw the image of perfection, the star who lit up every room she entered, the actress who could make audiences laugh and cry with ease. But behind closed doors, in the quiet of her home, the reality was much darker. That night in Los Angeles did not just mark the loss of an icon. It revealed the fragility of a woman who had been placed on a pedestal too high for anyone to stand upon for long. And from that moment on, Marilyn Monroe's story would no longer be told as simply the life of a Hollywood legend. It would forever be entwined with whispers of mystery, suspicion, and unanswered questions. The morning after Marilyn Monroe was discovered, the official machinery of investigation began to move. The world wanted answers, and quickly. Within hours, police officers, medical examiners, and reporters surrounded her Brentwood home. The narrative that would shape her legacy for decades was about to be written. On the surface, the conclusion seemed simple: Marilyn Monroe had died from an overdose of barbiturates, a type of sedative commonly prescribed during that era. Yet, as with everything connected to Marilyn, even the official story carried shadows of doubt. The coroner's office worked swiftly. Los Angeles County Deputy Coroner Thomas Noguchi, who would later be involved in several other high-profile cases, led the autopsy. His findings pointed toward acute barbiturate poisoning as the cause of death. Specifically, the toxicology report revealed extremely high levels of a drug called nembutal in her bloodstream, along with chloral hydrate. The combination of these substances created a lethal effect. Officially, her passing was ruled a probable suicide. The words probable suicide carried enormous weight. They framed the global conversation about Marilyn, reducing her vibrant and complicated life to a tragic ending. For some, this explanation seemed to fit the narrative. Marilyn had been open about her struggles with emotional health, her reliance on medication, and the immense pressure she endured under the public eye. She had also faced difficulties in her relationships and career. To those observers, the idea that she may have chosen to end her suffering was heartbreaking, but understandable. But others were not convinced. The word probable left too much space for interpretation. Why was not it definitive? Why did the report avoid stating with complete certainty that she had taken her own life? This single detail sparked endless debate. Was it simply a cautious choice of words by the coroner, or was it an acknowledgement that the evidence was not as clear as it appeared? Once the official cause was announced, critics, journalists, and even medical professionals began to question whether the story aligned with the physical evidence. Another point of contention was the method. Typically, in cases of overdose, remnants of pills are found in the stomach. But in Marilyn's case, no significant traces were discovered during the autopsy. How could such a high level of drugs be in her system without physical evidence of ingestion? Was this a sign of rapid absorption, or did it suggest a different method of administration altogether? These questions were quietly noted in reports but rarely explained to the public in detail. They became seeds of speculation that would grow into much larger conspiracy theories in the years ahead. Even the timeline presented challenges. Witness statements from her housekeeper, her psychiatrist, and her physician did not always match perfectly. Some recalled details differently, while others offered explanations that seemed rehearsed. It is not unusual for memories to blur under stress. But in a case involving one of the most famous women in the world, every inconsistency became magnified. The more people tried to piece together the night, the more the puzzle seemed unsolvable. The official declaration also raised questions about responsibility. If Marilyn's death was indeed a result of taking too much medication, how did she have access to such a dangerous combination? Were her doctors prescribing responsibly? Or was she being given too much without proper supervision? At the time, the medical culture in Hollywood often blurred the line between treatment and indulgence. Stars were handed prescriptions readily, with little thought for long-term effects. Marilyn, like many of her peers, became caught in a cycle of dependency encouraged by the very professionals who were meant to protect her. In the days following the announcement, the world reacted with shock and sorrow. Newspapers carried the stark headlines, "Marilyn Monroe dead at 36." Fans wept, while columnists speculated. Some embraced the official explanation, writing tributes about a troubled soul who could not bear the weight of stardom. Others hinted at darker possibilities, suggesting that the truth was far more complicated than what the coroner's report revealed. The ambiguity of probable suicide allowed for both interpretations to thrive. For Hollywood, the verdict was both convenient and haunting. It closed the case quickly, giving the public a reason that seemed to align with the tragic narrative of a star who burned too brightly. Yet, it also cast a permanent shadow over the industry, reminding audiences of the cost of fame and the fragility of those placed on pedestals. Marilyn's passing was not just a personal tragedy, it became a cultural reckoning. The public began questioning whether Hollywood's relentless pressure had played a role in pushing her toward the edge. Looking back, the coroner's conclusion reads like a statement trying to satisfy two worlds at once: the medical facts and the public's demand for closure. But history has shown that closure is not so easily achieved, especially in cases involving icons. The very phrasing of probable suicide ensured that debates would never fully end. Instead, it ignited a cycle of investigations, books, documentaries, and speculation that continues more than 60 years later. Marilyn Monroe's official cause of death may appear final on paper, but for many, it only marked the beginning of endless questions. Was it truly self-inflicted, or was there a hidden hand involved? Did her personal struggles fully explain the tragedy? Or were there circumstances carefully hidden from public view? The coroner's report closed the file, but in doing so, it opened a mystery that has never truly been solved. When the official report declared Marilyn Monroe's death as probable suicide by overdose, the world expected clarity. Instead, the verdict raised more questions than it answered. Beneath the surface of the coroner's statement lay a series of puzzling contradictions, details that did not quite align, timelines that seemed fractured, and testimony that felt carefully managed rather than spontaneous. These inconsistencies became the cracks in the foundation of the official story, fueling decades of speculation and distrust. One of the most striking issues was the absence of pill residue in Marilyn's stomach. Toxicology results showed lethal amounts of Nembutal and chloral hydrate in her system, yet no capsules or fragments were detected during the autopsy. In typical overdose cases, at least some evidence of ingestion remains. How then could her body contain such high levels of barbiturates without leaving a trace? Was this a simple medical anomaly, or did it point to another method of administration that was not fully considered at the time? For skeptics, this single inconsistency was enough to doubt the official conclusion. The timeline of her final night also contained contradictions. Her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, initially reported checking on Marilyn around midnight, noticing the locked door and the light still on. Later, under questioning, she adjusted her statements, suggesting that events may have unfolded differently. Why did her account shift? Was it nerves, confusion, or pressure to align with an official narrative? Small details, whether a door was locked, when calls were made, who arrived first, became magnified, each one casting doubt on the reliability of the timeline. Then there were the phone calls. Reports suggested Marilyn may have attempted to reach someone before her death. A phone was found near her body. And yet the records of outgoing calls that night were vague, incomplete, or disputed. Some claimed she had spoken to friends earlier in the evening and seemed upbeat, even hopeful about the future. Others implied she made desperate attempts to reach help. The lack of clarity around these calls created a fog that has never been lifted. Was the evidence lost, ignored, or deliberately kept hidden? Equally troubling were the inconsistencies among the professionals at the scene. Dr. Ralph Green's son, her psychiatrist, and Dr. Hyman Engelberg, her physician, were among the first to arrive after her housekeeper raised the alarm. Yet their accounts of the discovery varied. Who entered the room first, who declared her deceased, who made the first call to authorities? These might seem like minor discrepancies, but in a case of such significance, even the smallest contradictions drew suspicion. Critics asked, if the scene was straightforward, why did not the statements line up perfectly? Another layer of mystery involved the management of the scene itself. By the time police arrived, several hours had passed since the discovery. During that time, the doctors and housekeeper were alone in the house. Were items moved? Was the scene altered in any way? Some later testimony suggested that the bedroom may not have looked exactly the same by the time investigators entered. If true, this would raise serious questions about the integrity of the evidence. Why would anyone feel the need to adjust the scene of such a high-profile case? Adding to the contradictions were reports from neighbors Some claim to have seen unusual activity outside Marilyn's home that night, cars arriving and leaving. Unfamiliar figures near the property. Others reported hearing noises or voices during hours when Marilyn was supposedly alone. While these accounts could easily be dismissed as rumor, they added weight to the idea that something unusual occurred in Brentwood that evening. When stacked against the gaps in official testimony, the whispers of the neighborhood could not be entirely ignored. Even the coroner's phrasing raised eyebrows. Instead of stating the cause with certainty, the report used the term probable. In medical language, this word suggests a degree of doubt, an acknowledgement that the evidence is not airtight. Why, then, was a case involving one of the world's most famous women closed so quickly without resolving? These uncertainties, some argued it was efficiency, an attempt to provide closure in the midst of global attention. Others believed it was deliberate, a way to avoid digging too deeply into circumstances that might have exposed uncomfortable truths. Journalists of the time picked up on these contradictions almost immediately. Within days of her passing, articles appeared pointing out the inconsistencies. Some publications questioned the medical details, while others highlighted the unusual handling of the investigation. The public, already grieving, began to sense that something was amiss. Marilyn's death no longer looked like a straightforward tragedy. It was starting to resemble a mystery layered with hidden truths. These inconsistencies have kept the debate alive for more than 60 years. Were they simply the result of human error, stress, confusion, and the natural messiness of real-life events, or were they signs of something more, evidence of manipulation, concealment, or even interference by forces larger than any individual? The truth may never be known, but the contradictions remain undeniable. They sit at the heart of the Marilyn Monroe mystery, reminding us that the line between fact and speculation is sometimes thinner than we want to believe. What is clear is this: the official story, while neat on paper, does not fully account for the details left behind. Every locked door, every missing phone record, every altered testimony creates a gap that invites curiosity. And in those gaps, theories both plausible and far-fetched have thrived. Marilyn Monroe's death may have been labeled a probable suicide, but the inconsistencies ensured it would never be remembered as just that. Instead, it became the foundation of one of the most enduring mysteries in Hollywood history. As the questions surrounding Marilyn Monroe's death grew louder, attention soon shifted to her personal connections, particularly her ties to some of the most powerful men in America. For a woman who had already become the embodiment of Hollywood's glamour, her rumored relationships with influential political figures only deepened the intrigue. Among these, her name is most often linked to President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. Whether through verified encounters or whispered speculation, these connections ensured that Marilyn's story would never be seen purely as a Hollywood tragedy. It would forever carry the undertones of politics, secrecy, and power. Marilyn and John F. Kennedy's paths crossed at a time when both were at the height of their influence. Kennedy had risen to the presidency, projecting youth, charm, and ambition. Marilyn, meanwhile, was a cultural phenomenon whose image was recognized worldwide. The intersection of these two icons captured the imagination of the public, blending the allure of Hollywood with the mystique of political power. For some, their rumored association seemed almost inevitable, a meeting of two shining stars on parallel trajectories. The most famous moment linking Marilyn and the president came in May 1962, just months before her death. At Madison Square Garden in New York, Marilyn appeared at a celebration for Kennedy's birthday. Wearing a glittering, skin-tight gown, she delivered her now legendary performance of Happy Birthday, Mr. President. The sultry rendition sent shockwaves through the audience and, later, the press. While the event lasted only minutes, it became one of the most replayed and analyzed moments of her career. To many, it was more than just a performance, it was a public display of a connection that had long been whispered about behind closed doors. But beyond the glamour of that evening, speculation continued about the nature of Marilyn's ties to the Kennedy family. Some claimed she shared private moments with the president, while others suggested she developed a closer relationship with Robert Kennedy. These claims have been supported more by anecdotal accounts than hard evidence. Yet they persist, fueled by the inconsistencies surrounding her death. The idea that Marilyn was entangled in the private lives of America's most powerful family added layers of intrigue that no official report could erase. For those who doubted the official story of her passing, these relationships became central to alternative theories. Some argued that Marilyn knew too much, that her proximity to the Kennedys gave her access to secrets not meant for public knowledge. Others suggested that her vulnerability made her a liability, someone who could unintentionally expose delicate information. While such ideas remain unproven, they demonstrate how her death quickly became entangled with the politics of the time. It is important to recognize that Marilyn herself was not just a passive figure in these narratives. She was intelligent, ambitious, and socially engaged. Those who knew her often remarked on her curiosity about politics, her desire to move beyond the superficial image Hollywood had created for her. Being connected to political leaders may have given her a sense of purpose beyond acting, a chance to participate in conversations that shaped the nation. Yet, those same connections also placed her in a precarious position, where the lines between personal relationships and political consequences blurred. Robert Kennedy's alleged involvement in her life added even more complexity. As Attorney General, he was one of the most powerful men in the United States. Some accounts suggest he visited her home in Los Angeles, though details remain murky and contested. The overlapping rumors about her ties to both brothers created a storm of speculation. Could Marilyn have been simultaneously close to two of the most influential figures in the country? Or were these stories exaggerated, products of gossip magnified by her tragic end? The lack of definitive answers only intensified the fascination. The timing of her death in relation to these rumored connections also fueled suspicion. To some observers, it seemed too coincidental that Marilyn passed away shortly after the iconic Madison Square Garden event and her supposed involvement with the Kennedys. Was her death unrelated, a tragic accident magnified by circumstance? Or did her political associations place her at risk in ways the public could never fully see? Again, certainty was elusive, but the questions themselves ensured that her story would never be confined to Hollywood alone. Media coverage of the time walked a delicate line. While some outlets reported openly on her supposed ties to the Kennedys, others avoided the subject altogether. Perhaps out of caution or political pressure. This selective silence only made the rumors more enticing. In the absence of transparency, speculation filled the void, and conspiracy theories flourished. Over time, the idea of Marilyn as a woman caught between Hollywood and Washington became a central part of her legend. What remains undeniable is that Marilyn Monroe lived at the intersection of celebrity and power. Her rumored connections to the Kennedys highlighted the fragile balance between personal relationships and public scrutiny. Whether or not the full truth will ever be known, the perception of Marilyn as someone entangled with the highest levels of government transformed her story from a Hollywood tragedy into a national mystery. It ensured that discussions about her life and death would always carry a political dimension. In the end, Marilyn Monroe's ties to powerful men may never be fully untangled. Were they real, exaggerated, or entirely fabricated by a society eager to link beauty with power? The truth lies somewhere in the shadows, obscured by decades of rumor and speculation. But one fact is clear: without these connections, her death might have been remembered as simply another Hollywood tragedy. Instead, it became a story that blurred the line between glamour and government, stage and state, myth and reality. And that blurring of worlds is what continues to make Marilyn Monroe's legacy as mysterious as it is unforgettable. As whispers about Marilyn Monroe's ties to powerful political figures spread, another layer of suspicion emerged, one that reached deep into the halls of America's intelligence community. In the tense climate of the early 1960s, when the Cold War shaped nearly every decision made by Washington, the idea that Marilyn may have been under the watchful eye of federal agencies like the FBI and the CIA did not seem far-fetched. To some, her connections and her untimely death suggested not just tragedy but surveillance, secrecy, and perhaps even interference. Documents declassified decades later revealed that the FBI kept extensive files on Marilyn Monroe. While these files did not provide a smoking gun or a clear conspiracy, they confirmed that the government paid attention to her activities. Why would a Hollywood actress attract such scrutiny? The official explanation centered on her political associations. Marilyn was known to mingle with intellectuals, activists, and, at times, figures whose views were critical of U.S. policies. In the eyes of federal agencies, especially during the paranoia of the Cold War, even casual conversations could be perceived as potential threats. Some reports suggested that Marilyn's home phone may have been tapped, and that her private conversations were monitored. The idea that the world's most glamorous actress might have been under surveillance struck the public as shocking. But within the context of the era, it was not unprecedented. The early 1960s saw the government keeping close tabs on celebrities, activists, and anyone whose influence reached wide audiences. Marilyn, with her combination of fame and rumored ties to political leaders, fit the profile of someone who might be considered worth watching. The CIA's name also surfaces in theories about her life and death, though evidence remains speculative. Some argue that Marilyn's alleged proximity to political figures placed her too close to matters of national importance. If she overheard sensitive conversations or became involved in discussions not meant for public ears, intelligence agencies may have viewed her as a liability. Others suggest that this connection has been exaggerated over time, a product of blending rumor with the atmosphere of secrecy that defined the Cold War. Adding fuel to suspicion was the timing of certain FBI documents. Some files relating to Marilyn were stamped with dates close to the time of her death, leading theorists to wonder whether the agencies had taken a special interest in her during her final days. While no direct evidence links these documents to foul play, their existence complicates the narrative. Why was an actress's personal life of such interest to government officials at the highest level? Was it simple precaution, or was something more happening behind the scenes? The handling of Marilyn's death also raised questions about federal involvement. Critics have long argued that the investigation seemed rushed, the evidence thinly documented, and the inconsistencies never fully resolved. Some interpret this as incompetence or the result of overwhelming media pressure. Others believe it points to deliberate interference, a quiet effort to close the case quickly and avoid the possibility of sensitive details reaching the public. If true, this would not necessarily mean direct involvement in her passing, but rather a decision to manage the narrative in order to protect powerful individuals or national security interests. The Cold War atmosphere cannot be overlooked in understanding why these suspicions took hold. The early 1960s were marked by intense rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, heightened secrecy, and widespread distrust. Stories of espionage, surveillance, and hidden agendas filled newspapers daily. Against this backdrop, the idea that Marilyn Monroe might somehow be entangled in intelligence operations did not seem impossible. She was, after all, at the intersection of Hollywood, politics, and public influence, a rare and potent combination. Journalists and authors later examined the FBI's files on Marilyn, pointing out how extensive they were compared to those kept on other public figures. These files recorded details of her friendships, her political leanings, and even her travel plans. To some, this level of monitoring suggested that the government was worried about her influence or potential vulnerability. To others, it was simply proof that the paranoia of the Cold War had cast its net too wide, ensnaring even celebrities who had little to do with politics. The very existence of these files has fueled countless theories. Did agencies know more about her final days than they revealed? Did surveillance records capture conversations that might explain the contradictions in her timeline, or were the agencies merely observers, documenting events without interfering, without full transparency? The answers remain elusive, and the mystery deepens. What is certain is that the suspicion of FBI and CIA involvement has kept Marilyn's story alive in a way few Hollywood tragedies ever are. Unlike other stars who left too soon, her death became a stage where politics, fame, and secrecy collided. Even today, the mere mention of government files in connection with her name sends imaginations running wild. Whether those files contain overlooked truths or simply mundane details is almost irrelevant. Their existence alone ensures that Marilyn Monroe will always be viewed not only as a star but as a figure caught in the shadow of power. In the end, the idea of federal agencies being involved in Marilyn Monroe's life is both captivating and unsettling. It reflects not just her personal story but also the culture of surveillance and secrecy that defined her era. Whether she was truly a person of interest to the nation's most powerful institutions, or simply swept into their orbit because of who she knew, her legacy will forever carry the hint of hidden eyes watching from the dark. And in those shadows, the line between fact and speculation remains blurred, leaving her story as one of the most enduring enigmas of the 20th century. As the years passed after Marilyn Monroe's death, the official verdict of probable suicide failed to silence the questions. Instead, it seemed to open a floodgate of speculation. Among the many theories that emerged, one of the most persistent was the idea that Marilyn had learned too much secrets that placed her in a dangerous position. This notion, sometimes referred to as the silencing theory, suggests that Marilyn Monroe was not merely a Hollywood star but an unintended witness to information far beyond the world of movies and glamour. At the heart of this theory is Marilyn's proximity to power. Her rumored relationships with President John F. Kennedy and Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy created the impression that she was closer than most to the political heartbeat of America. If true, this would mean she may have overheard conversations not meant for public ears. Conversations about national security, foreign affairs, or matters that could shift the balance of politics. In an age defined by Cold War tensions, even the slightest whisper of sensitive knowledge could be viewed as dangerous. Supporters of this theory point to Marilyn's well-known openness. Friends described her as someone who longed for honesty, who disliked secrecy. and who often confided her thoughts to those around her. If she did learn confidential information, could she have shared it too freely, not realizing the risks? Some authors have claimed that Marilyn kept a diary, sometimes referred to as the Red Diary, in which she recorded private conversations. While the diary itself has never been confirmed, the idea of it adds fuel to the speculation. If such a document existed, what secrets might it have contained? Another layer of this theory revolves around the days leading up to her death. Some accounts suggest that Marilyn had felt betrayed, isolated, and frustrated by her relationships with powerful figures. Was she threatening to go public with her story? Did she believe she had been used and then cast aside? If she was considering sharing details about her personal connections, that possibility alone could have sent shockwaves through the political establishment. In that scenario, her words, whether in an interview, a book, or even casual conversation, would have carried consequences far beyond Hollywood gossip. The timing of her death only deepened suspicion. It occurred during a period when Cold War paranoia was at its height, when intelligence agencies and political leaders were hyper-aware of potential leaks and vulnerabilities. Against this backdrop, the idea that Marilyn might reveal sensitive information seemed, to some, not only plausible but dangerous. Even if she had no intention of doing so, the mere perception that she could have been a risk might have been enough to make her situation precarious. Critics of the silencing theory argue that it relies too heavily on speculation and lacks concrete evidence. They point out that no diary has ever been produced, and no verified record links Marilyn to classified knowledge. To them, the theory reflects more about the culture of suspicion in the 1960s than about Marilyn herself. They suggest that the image of a glamorous actress caught in the web of politics was simply too tempting a narrative for writers and filmmakers to resist, regardless of factual basis. And yet, the inconsistencies surrounding her death leave space for the theory to thrive. The missing details, the shifting testimonies, and the vague language of the coroner's report all provide fertile ground for speculation. To those who distrust the official story, the idea that Marilyn knew too much and was silenced before she could speak offers a compelling explanation for why her case feels unresolved. The enduring power of this theory also comes from the cultural fascination with secrets. Human beings are drawn to the idea of hidden truths, of knowledge kept just out of reach. In Marilyn's case, her beauty and fame made her an ideal vessel for such speculation. She was not just an actress, she was an icon, a figure whose life seemed larger than the screen. If she was caught in a struggle between Hollywood glamour and political intrigue, her story becomes not just tragic but mythic. It is worth remembering, however, that Marilyn was also deeply human. The idea that she might have carried dangerous secrets adds drama to her story, but it also risks overshadowing her real struggles: loneliness, insecurity, and the relentless pressures of fame. Whether or not she knew more than she should have, her vulnerability was real, and her desire to be taken seriously went far beyond gossip or politics. In the end, the theory may say as much about society's need to create legends as it does about Marilyn herself. Still, the silencing theory remains one of the most discussed possibilities in books, documentaries, and debates. It keeps alive the idea that Marilyn's death was not simply the result of personal pain, but the outcome of forces beyond her control. It transforms her from a victim of circumstance into a figure caught in the dangerous crossroads of beauty, power, and secrecy. Perhaps that is why, more than 60 years later, the whispers continue. Did Marilyn Monroe know too much? Was she silenced before she could speak? or has her story been reshaped by decades of imagination? Fueled by the mystery of an ending that never quite fit the official narrative, these questions may never be answered with certainty. But as long as they are asked, Marilyn remains more than a star. She remains a mystery that refuses to fade. On the morning of August 5, 1962, the world woke to headlines that seemed impossible to believe: Marilyn Monroe dead at 36. The announcement spread like lightning, carried on front pages, radio broadcasts, and television screens across the globe. For millions, it felt as though time itself had stopped. Marilyn was not just a star, she was a cultural phenomenon. The embodiment of glamour and vulnerability combined. To hear that she was gone was more than shocking. It was unthinkable. In Los Angeles, the news sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Actors, directors, and studio executives reacted with disbelief. Marilyn was scheduled for future projects. She was still considered one of the industry's most bankable stars. To many of her colleagues, the official narrative of overdose and probable suicide did not fit the woman they had recently spoken to. Some remembered her discussing new roles and ambitions. Others recalled moments of laughter and optimism. The idea that she was suddenly gone seemed surreal, almost staged, as if it were part of a tragic screenplay no one had agreed to act in. For fans, the grief was immediate and overwhelming. Crowds gathered outside her Brentwood home, leaving flowers, handwritten notes, and photographs at the gates. Strangers wept openly in the streets, treating her loss not just as the death of a celebrity but as the loss of someone who had shared their lives. Marilyn's image had always carried a strange intimacy through the silver screen. Audiences felt they knew her, as if she belonged not just to Hollywood but to them personally. Her passing broke that illusion in the harshest way possible. Newspapers devoted entire sections to her life, recounting her rise from foster homes to global superstardom. Photographs of her in iconic roles filled the pages, alongside tributes from fellow actors and directors. Yet, woven into the mourning were hints of suspicion. Some journalists noted the contradictions in the timeline of her final night. Others quietly mentioned her rumored connections to political figures. While many tributes painted her as a tragic figure undone by fame, a few dared to ask whether there was more to the story. From the very first day, Marilyn's death was not only a matter of grief but of mystery. The international reaction was equally intense. In Europe, Asia, and beyond, Marilyn was celebrated as an icon of modern culture. Her films had transcended language barriers, and her image had appeared on magazine covers around the world. In Paris, London, and Tokyo, newspapers mourned her as a symbol of both the promise and the fragility of American glamour. Even in countries far removed from Hollywood, people felt the loss of someone whose face had come to represent beauty, confidence, and stardom. The universality of the grief was a testament to how deeply Marilyn had touched the collective imagination. Television footage from the time captured the collective mourning. Reporters interviewed fans outside her home, some clutching flowers, others unable to hold back tears. One young woman said simply, "It feels like I lost a friend." That sentiment echoed across continents. Marilyn had been more than a distant celebrity. She had been a figure of dreams, of hope, and, paradoxically, of shared vulnerability. Her openness about loneliness and insecurity had made her relatable even at the height of her fame. Her death, therefore, felt personal to millions. Hollywood itself entered a period of reflection. Directors questioned whether the industry had pushed her too hard. Fellow actresses wondered whether they too might one day be crushed by the relentless pressure of fame. Marilyn's passing became a mirror, forcing the entertainment world to confront the cost of stardom. For every glamorous photograph, there was now an unspoken question: at what price did these images come? Behind the lights and cameras, how many stars struggled with the same silent battles? The news also triggered a wave of artistic tributes. Writers, musicians, and painters responded to her passing with works dedicated to her memory. Songs were written in her honor, poems published in her name. Over time, Marilyn became not just a star who had died young but a symbol of beauty lost too soon. An archetype of the tragic artist. This transformation into legend began almost immediately after the announcement of her death. She was no longer only Marilyn Monroe the actress, she was Marilyn Monroe the myth. The speed with which the story spread also shaped the way it was perceived. In 1962, the world was connected by newspapers, radio, and television, but not yet by the Internet. The sudden flood of information, some accurate and some speculative, left the public with more questions than answers. Without the ability to fact-check instantly, people relied on rumor as much as reporting. This environment made it easy for conspiracy theories to take root. Every inconsistency in the official account became magnified. Every whispered detail became a potential clue. For many, the grief turned quickly into obsession. Who had been with Marilyn in her final hours? Why were there so many contradictions in the accounts? Why did the official report sound incomplete? In the absence of clear answers, the public filled the void with speculation. The line between mourning and mystery blurred almost immediately, ensuring that Marilyn's death would never be remembered as a simple tragedy. It became, instead, a cultural puzzle. Even today, looking back at the media coverage of 1962, one can see the seeds of the enduring fascination. The headlines mourned her, but the subtext questioned her. The tributes celebrated her, but the rumors surrounded her. The combination of beauty, tragedy, and unanswered questions was irresistible. And in that combination, Marilyn Monroe was transformed from a beloved actress into one of the greatest enigmas of the 20th century. As the years turned into decades, Marilyn Monroe's death remained an unsolved riddle in the public imagination. Officially, the case had been closed in 1962 with the verdict of probable suicide by overdose. But for countless fans, journalists, and investigators, that explanation never felt entirely satisfying. Was her death a tragic accident brought on by exhaustion and medication? Or was it something darker, an event staged, manipulated, or concealed by forces far greater than a single person's private struggles? This tension between accident and orchestration has fueled one of the longest-running debates in modern history. Supporters of the accident theory argue that Marilyn's passing was the result of unfortunate circumstances colliding at the wrong time. They point to her long-documented reliance on prescribed medication and her fragile emotional state. To them, the simplest explanation is the most likely: she took too much, either intentionally or unintentionally, and her body could not withstand it. The medical records confirm high levels of barbiturates, and the lack of solid evidence pointing to foul play strengthens this conclusion. In this view, her death was heartbreaking but not mysterious. It was the final chapter in a life marked by relentless pressure and vulnerability. Yet, the staged or silenced theory has proven far more enduring in popular culture. This interpretation suggests that Marilyn's death was not a solitary act but an event carefully managed to look like 1. The inconsistencies in the timeline, the missing evidence, and the vague wording of the coroner's report serve as the foundation of this belief. If her death had been orchestrated, who stood to benefit? For some theorists, it was political figures concerned about potential scandals. For others, it was intelligence agencies wary of sensitive information. While no conclusive evidence has ever confirmed these ideas, the unanswered questions have kept them alive for decades. Adding complexity is the idea of cover-up rather than cause. Even if Marilyn's death was accidental or self-inflicted, some believe the circumstances were altered afterward to protect reputations, or shield powerful individuals from scrutiny. According to this theory, the truth may not have been sinister in itself, but the handling of it created layers of suspicion. Evidence may have been misplaced, timelines adjusted, or statements rehearsed to minimize scandal. In the end, the secrecy may have been less about Marilyn herself and more about those connected to her. Public fascination with these competing theories reveals something deeper. Marilyn's death is not only about what happened that night in Brentwood but also about what she represented. She embodied the contradictions of fame, the dazzling surface and the hidden cost. To accept her death as a simple accident feels unsatisfying to many because her life was anything but simple. The narrative of orchestration or conspiracy aligns more closely with the way people perceive her story. Larger than life, filled with drama, and unresolved even after the final act. The media has played a major role in sustaining this debate. Documentaries, books, and films continue to revisit the case, each offering a slightly different angle. Some highlight newly released FBI files, while others focus on the so-called Red Diary or eyewitness testimony. Every new detail, no matter how small, is treated as a potential clue. But with each retelling, the line between fact and speculation blurs further. What began as an investigation into a tragedy has become a cultural myth, part detective story, part cautionary tale, and part legend. Academics and biographers often caution against drawing firm conclusions. They note that historical cases like Marilyn's are shaped as much by public perception as by evidence. Over time, memories fade, documents are lost, and rumors take on a life of their own. In this environment, the truth can become impossible to untangle. Was her death staged? Was it an accident, or was it a combination of both? A personal tragedy magnified by secrecy and mishandling? The absence of definitive answers ensures that every theory retains some degree of plausibility. What cannot be denied is the lasting impact of the uncertainty itself. Marilyn Monroe's death has become a symbol of unanswered questions, a reminder that not all stories end with clarity. The debate keeps her relevant, ensuring that her name continues to surface in conversations about fame, politics, and mystery. Each generation revisits her case with fresh eyes, bringing its own cultural anxieties to the interpretation. In the 1960s, it was fear of political scandal. In later decades, it became distrust of government institutions. Today, it reflects our fascination with hidden truths and the blurred line between fact and narrative. In some ways, the persistence of the debate reflects the way Marilyn lived. She was always seen through multiple lenses, a glamorous star, a fragile woman, a symbol of beauty, and a victim of her own success. Just as no one could fully define her in life, no single explanation can fully contain her in death. The mystery surrounding her passing is not only about evidence or conspiracy, it is about the impossibility of reconciling the myth of Marilyn Monroe with the reality of Norma Jeane. Ultimately, the question of whether her death was staged or accidental may never be resolved. But perhaps that is why the fascination endures. Certainty would close the story. Mystery keeps it alive. And for Marilyn Monroe, whose life was defined by allure, ambiguity, and complexity, perhaps it is fitting that her final chapter remains as elusive as she was captivating. Marilyn Monroe's death in 1962 was not only a personal tragedy, it was also a turning point for Hollywood. The shock of losing its brightest star forced the entertainment industry to confront uncomfortable truths about the pressures placed on women, the image of stardom, and the invisible costs of fame. Marilyn had been the ultimate symbol of glamour, yet her passing revealed how fragile that image truly was. For Hollywood, it was both a warning and a mirror. At the time, female stars were expected to embody perfection. They were styled, promoted, and packaged as ideals of beauty and charm. Studios built their careers carefully, shaping public personas that were often very different from the realities of their lives. Marilyn was perhaps the most striking example of this. To the outside world, she was radiant, confident, and playful. But behind the camera, she was vulnerable, struggling with insecurities and exhaustion. Her death exposed the gap between the image Hollywood demanded and the person behind it. This tension sparked conversations within the industry. How many other actresses were silently enduring similar struggles? How many were pressured to maintain an impossible standard while hiding the toll it took on their well-being? Marilyn's passing was a reminder that stars were not untouchable icons, they were human beings facing immense pressure. For many in Hollywood, it raised questions about whether the system itself was broken. The tragedy also reshaped the way the public viewed fame. Before Marilyn's death, stardom was often portrayed as a dream without flaws, the pinnacle of success. But her sudden loss shattered that illusion. Fans began to see fame not only as glamorous but also as dangerous. The glitter of Hollywood was now tinged with tragedy. And the idea of the tragic star became etched into popular culture. In the years that followed, Marilyn became the archetype for countless stories about the price of fame. A symbol of how success and vulnerability can collide. For women in particular, Marilyn's story highlighted the challenges of being taken seriously in an industry that valued appearance above all else. She had fought to prove her talent, seeking roles that would showcase her depth as an actress. Yet, she was repeatedly cast in roles that emphasized her beauty rather than her intelligence or skill. Her death underscored how little control many women had over their careers, even those at the peak of fame. It raised uncomfortable questions about how Hollywood treated women not just in casting but in the way their personal lives were scrutinized, judged, and consumed by the media. The impact extended beyond film. Fashion, advertising, and music all reflected the shift. Marilyn had been the ultimate style icon, her image selling everything from perfume to magazines. After her passing, her likeness was used in a different way, no longer just as a symbol of glamour but also as a reminder of fragility. Photographs of her smiling on set or posing on red carpets now carried a haunting undertone. They were no longer just images of success. They were glimpses of a life cut short. This duality made Marilyn a more complex symbol than any studio could have designed. Her death also fueled the rise of a new type of celebrity coverage. Tabloid journalism, already growing in influence, found in Marilyn's story the perfect blend of beauty, tragedy, and mystery. The way her life and death were reported set a template for how the media would treat future stars. From that point on, the public did not just want to watch films, they wanted to know everything about the people behind them. Privacy became almost impossible for celebrities. And Marilyn's story was both a cause and a warning of what was to come. In many ways, Marilyn became the model of the eternal icon. Unlike other stars whose fame faded over time, Her death froze her in place, forever young, forever glamorous, forever enigmatic. Hollywood quickly realized the cultural power of such an image. Films, documentaries, and biographies about her multiplied, ensuring that her story remained alive. At the same time, her legacy influenced how other actresses were perceived. Women who followed in her footsteps were often compared to her, sometimes unfairly, as if they too were destined to embody both beauty and tragedy. The deeper impact, however, was more subtle. Marilyn's death forced Hollywood to acknowledge that the industry's treatment of women had consequences. While change came slowly, her story became a reference point for conversations about mental health, pressure, and the responsibilities of those who managed the lives of stars. Decades later, as movements for greater transparency and fairness in Hollywood gained momentum, Marilyn's name often resurfaced as a reminder of what happens when the system fails to protect its most vulnerable. Even now, more than 60 years later, Marilyn Monroe continues to shape the way we think about stardom. She is not only remembered for her beauty and her roles but also as a symbol of the hidden costs of fame. Her life and death remind us that the industry's golden image often masks a much darker reality. For Hollywood, she remains both its brightest creation and its greatest cautionary tale. And so, Marilyn Monroe's impact goes beyond the silver screen. She changed how the world views fame, how the industry views women, and how culture remembers its icons. Her story is not just about the past, it is about the present and the future. Every time a star struggles under the weight of public expectation, every time an actress fights to be recognized for her talent rather than her appearance, Marilyn's legacy is present. Her death may have ended her life, but its reverberations continue to shape Hollywood to this day. When Marilyn Monroe passed away in 1962, many believed her story had ended. Yet in truth, her death was not the conclusion of her influence but the beginning of her transformation into something even larger than life, a cultural icon whose presence would transcend time, borders, and even generations. Marilyn did not remain simply a Hollywood star, she became a myth, a legend, and an enduring symbol of beauty, fragility, and the contradictions of fame. One of the most striking aspects of Marilyn's legacy is the way her image has persisted. Photographs of her continue to circulate worldwide, decades after they were first taken. Her famous poses, the white dress billowing above a subway grate, her radiant smile on red carpets, her playful yet vulnerable expressions are instantly recognizable, even to people who may never have seen one of her films. This universality demonstrates how she became more than a performer. She became an iconographic figure, almost like a timeless painting or a cultural emblem etched into the collective memory of humanity. Artists were among the first to immortalize her. Andy Warhol's iconic pop art portraits of Marilyn in bold, bright colors turned her into a modern-day Mona Lisa, an image endlessly reproduced, reinterpreted, and reimagined. Through Warhol and countless other artists, Marilyn's face became more than a reminder of her films. It became a symbol of the intersection between celebrity and art, glamour and tragedy. Even in visual culture, she was no longer simply a person, she was an idea. Her influence also stretched into music, literature, and fashion. Musicians have referenced her in lyrics for decades, from Elton John's Candle in the Wind to Madonna's tributes to her style. Writers have drawn inspiration from her life, creating novels, poems, and biographies that attempt to capture her essence. Fashion houses continue to borrow from her look. Her platinum blonde hair, red lips, and hourglass figure remain staples of glamour. Marilyn became not only a person of her time but a timeless blueprint for allure. Yet, Marilyn's cultural power lies not only in her beauty but in her contradictions. She embodied the glamour of Hollywood but also its shadows. She projected confidence on screen but often spoke of loneliness off-screen. She seemed untouchable to fans, yet she revealed her vulnerabilities in ways that made her relatable. This duality is part of why she endures. People see in Marilyn both the dream and the reality, the star and the human being, the myth and the truth. She represents the paradox of fame, to be adored by millions yet still feel unseen. Her legacy also carries a distinctly symbolic weight for women. Marilyn challenged the limits of her time, fighting to be taken seriously as an actress and as a person beyond her looks. Even though she was often typecast in roles that highlighted her charm, she studied acting, created her own production company, and pushed for creative control. In doing so, she became not only an icon of beauty but also an early symbol of independence in an industry dominated by men. Today, she is remembered as someone who sought to rewrite her own story, even when the system resisted. Beyond Hollywood, Marilyn has become a global cultural figure. Murals of her appear on city walls across continents. Museums dedicate entire exhibitions to her life and legacy. Even in places far removed from American culture, her face is instantly recognized, often used to symbolize the allure and contradictions of Western celebrity. She transcended language, geography, and even time itself. Few figures from the 20th century hold such universal recognition. What is perhaps most fascinating is how Marilyn Monroe continues to evolve in meaning. For some, she represents pure glamour, a symbol of beauty frozen in the golden age of cinema. For others, she is a cautionary tale about the cost of fame. For artists and feminists, she embodies both the exploitation of women in Hollywood and the resilience of a woman who tried to reclaim her power. In every era, Marilyn takes on new significance, reflecting the cultural anxieties and hopes of the time. She is not static, she is ever-changing, shaped by how we choose to remember her. Even conspiracy theories about her death have contributed to her myth. Whether or not they hold truth, they keep her in public conversation, reminding us that her story remains unresolved. The mystery adds another layer to her cultural status. Marilyn is not remembered only for her films or her beauty but also for the unanswered questions surrounding her life and death. In a world that craves certainty, she represents the power of the unsolved, the enigmatic, and the eternal unknown. In this way, Marilyn Monroe exists on two levels, the woman and the symbol. The woman, Norma Jeane, lived a life of struggles and dreams, joys and heartbreaks. The symbol, Marilyn Monroe, is immortal, endlessly replicated in art, fashion, and memory. This dual existence is what makes her unique. Unlike other stars, she is not confined to the past. She lives on in the present, reinterpreted by each new generation. Ultimately, Marilyn Monroe became more than herself. She became a mirror reflecting society's obsession with beauty, its hunger for fame, and its fascination with mystery. Through her, we see both what we desire and what we fear, the allure of glamour and the danger of its cost. And in that reflection, Marilyn remains with us, not as a figure frozen in 1962 but as an eternal presence, a cultural heartbeat that refuses to fade. In the decades following Marilyn Monroe's death, her story refused to rest in peace. Instead of fading into history, it became the foundation for an entire industry of speculation, investigation, and artistic exploration. Writers, filmmakers, and researchers have returned to her life and death time and again, each trying to answer the questions that official reports left unresolved. The result has been a legacy not only of stardom but of storytelling, a never-ending cycle of books, documentaries, films, and theories that keep her memory alive in ways few others have ever achieved. Almost immediately after her passing, journalists began to probe deeper into the inconsistencies of her final night. Early biographies of Marilyn included entire chapters devoted to her mysterious death, treating it not merely as an end but as a puzzle. Over time, these accounts multiplied, with each author offering a slightly different perspective. Some works emphasized her struggles with fame, others focused on her alleged political connections, while still others leaned heavily into the possibility of conspiracy. Together, they formed a mosaic of interpretations, none definitive, but all compelling. Documentaries and films soon followed. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, television specials revisited the details of her passing, often with dramatic reenactments that blurred the line between fact and speculation. Later, more polished documentaries explored newly released files, including FBI records and interviews with people who had known her. Each production claimed to shed new light on the case. But more often than not, they only added layers of intrigue. Viewers were left with the same question: was Marilyn's death the result of personal tragedy, political scandal, or something even more complex? The mystery has proven irresistible to Hollywood itself. Feature films have been inspired by her life, some dramatizing her final days, others reimagining her as a character caught in webs of power and betrayal. Directors have used Marilyn's story as a lens to examine not only her life but also broader themes of fame, gender, and vulnerability. While not all portrayals have been embraced by critics, they demonstrate the enduring fascination with her as a figure larger than life. To this day, her name carries instant recognition, ensuring that any project bearing her likeness will draw global attention. Of course, no exploration of Marilyn Monroe's legacy would be complete without addressing the conspiracy theories that continue to swirl around her death. From whispers of government involvement to claims about powerful political families, the list of possibilities seems endless. Some theories focus on the so-called Red Diary, a rumored journal in which Marilyn may have recorded sensitive information. Others point to inconsistencies in witness testimonies and the absence of pill residue in her autopsy as evidence of foul play. While none of these theories have ever been conclusively proven, their persistence reflects a deep cultural need to believe that her story was more than a simple tragedy. The appeal of these theories lies not only in the mystery itself but also in what Marilyn represented. She was the ultimate symbol of beauty and success. Yet her death revealed fragility. To imagine her as the victim of forces beyond her control adds drama to her narrative, making it feel almost like a Greek tragedy, a larger-than-life figure undone by circumstances she could not escape. For some, this explanation feels more fitting than the idea of an accidental or self-inflicted overdose. It transforms her from a star who succumbed to pressure into a figure caught in the crossfire of history. Books, films, and documentaries have also shaped how different generations interpret Marilyn's story. For audiences in the 1960s, her death reflected the anxieties of the Cold War and the hidden dealings of politics. For later generations, it became a cautionary tale about the dangers of fame, the exploitation of women in Hollywood, and the relentless intrusion of media into private lives. Today, Marilyn's story continues to resonate in an age of social media, where the pressures of constant exposure are even more intense. In this sense, her story is both timeless and timely, always relevant no matter the decade. The sheer volume of material dedicated to her is staggering. Hundreds of books have been written about her life and death, ranging from scholarly biographies to sensationalist accounts. Countless documentaries continue to be produced, each claiming to offer the truth while ultimately leaving the mystery intact. Even podcasts and online platforms have entered the conversation, dissecting her story for new audiences. Marilyn Monroe has become a permanent subject of investigation, her case a mystery that refuses to close. And yet, despite all the speculation, perhaps the most powerful aspect of Marilyn's legacy is that no theory has ever fully explained her death. Every book, every film, every theory ends with the same uncertainty. This unresolved quality is part of what keeps her memory alive. Certainty might have allowed her story to fade, but ambiguity ensures it remains a cultural obsession. Marilyn's death, much like her life, is defined by paradox known everywhere, understood by no one. In the end, the countless works inspired by Marilyn Monroe reflect more about us than about her. They reveal our fascination with beauty, our suspicion of power, and our hunger for mystery. They show how a single life can become a canvas onto which society paints its fears and desires. And they prove that Marilyn Monroe, more than just an actress, has become an eternal muse, one whose story will be told, retold, and reimagined for generations to come. Her films may have captured her talent, but it is the unanswered questions that have cemented her immortality. Every book written, every documentary aired, every theory proposed adds another layer to her myth. Marilyn Monroe lives on not only in cinema but in the very act of speculation itself. She is no longer just a star, she is a legend, a riddle, and a cultural touchstone whose story continues to unfold more than 60 years after her final curtain call. And so, the story of Marilyn Monroe remains as captivating today as it was more than 60 years ago. Officially, her death was ruled a probable suicide. But the unanswered questions, contradictions, and whispers of hidden truths have transformed her into far more than just a Hollywood star. She became a legend, a mystery, and a mirror reflecting the glamour and the darkness of fame. Her life tells us about beauty and ambition, but her death reminds us of the fragility behind the spotlight. Marilyn Monroe was more than the sum of the rumors surrounding her. She was an artist, a dreamer, and a woman who tried to carve her own path in a world that often reduced her to an image. Whether her end was accident, orchestration, or something we will never fully understand, the legacy she left behind endures. In her story, we see both the brilliance and the cost of being an icon. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the mystery of Marilyn Monroe. If you found this story intriguing, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue exploring the untold stories and hidden truths of history. Until next time, stay curious, and remember, behind every legend lies a mystery waiting to be uncovered.